most of my 14 Irish Catholic girl cousins all went to Sacred Heart schools. Some in Atherton, mostly there at Broadway. And my sister and I went 12 years here at Broadway, which was around 70 years ago. Wow. So time flies. I see the connection between my Irish Catholic ancestors, the oppressed, and my Spanish Catholic ancestors, the dominant oppressors. Constantly new realizations every time I go through this, to see now some difference within my lineage. So I see the connection with my spiritual lineage through the society and its Catholic missionary history and the power exerted by the institutional church. So my beloved Sacred Heart had perpetrated oppressions in their history in the US. And I was deeply disappointed and spiritually confused in learning about this. And I learned more in depth just this summer during the quarantine. So it turns out the RCJ ran a school for the Potawatomi girls for some 37 years, until 1879, on the Potawatomi Indian Reservation in Kansas. So the school was funded by the US government. They followed the Bureau of Indian Affairs curriculum and were inspected and had to report back to it. So the society was fully embedded in the system of cultural genocide by education to turn Indians into civilized Christian farmers who would then be worthy of citizenship. And when the allotment and citizenship treaty in 1861 was passed, the RCJ actually took possession of over 300 acres of the former Indian reservation land for their own school, which turned out to be mostly for the colonial settlers' children. And the Potawatomi divided themselves, and most of the Catholic Potawatomi who'd been converted since the 1600s by French missionaries up around the Great Lakes. That's where they were originally from. They moved to Oklahoma. They were forced to move to Oklahoma. In order to get the land in Oklahoma, they had to give up their tribal affiliation to become citizens and receive their allotments at that time. And they paid for their own removal to Oklahoma. And it was a survival necessity. And they became the current citizen Potawatomi nation, now one of the largest indigenous nations in the US, with around 14,000 members. The society was given as well as bought and owned slaves at the Grand Coteau, Louisiana school. When I learned about the slave owning and the collusion with the US government in cultural genocide, I did feel devastated, and I felt that my spiritual lineage was corrupted. And I felt soul corrupted about it. The constant fantasy and illusions being removed. I learned of the connection between the doctrine of discovery and slavery and the colonizing of the world by European white men. And it was my history. It is who I am. And even my spiritual guides were complicit. So this is slave trade. Fascinating history. So this is the basis of our country. In the English colonies, slave status for Africans became hereditary in the mid-1600s with the passage of colonial laws. So it wasn't understood that slavery would be inherited. They had to make laws to create it. And in 1703, more than 42% of New York City's households held slaves, which is second only to Charleston in the South. So the ascendancy of the class interests and profit-driven destruction of peoples and resources by the white settlers in the colonies has relevance for our contemporary political reality and the persistence of settler colonialism ideology, structural racism, and racial capitalism today. And I think we need to better understand that we are in a colonized country and wonder how that has affected us and our consciousness and bias and prejudices. So colonization became an American mythology. Manifest destiny is the belief that white 19th century American settlers were chosen by God to spread democracy and Christianity across the continent, with historical connection all the way back to the Crusades and the doctrine of discovery, and especially connected with the New England white Protestant Puritans, who carried with them a demanding sense of providential Christian purpose. Their purpose was to spread their Christianity. The national narrative of manifest destiny was used by colonizers to subjugate the peoples they conquered in order to claim legitimacy for their colonizing practices. This is the story they made up, right? This is the story that's alive and well today. This is the kind of national mythic narrative can be seen as essential to nation building. Every nation seems to have their story. In this case, defining the true national only through the definition of the other, like those being forced forward by the inexorable figure of Columbia, who represents America. And she's bringing the education book forward in her arm, and she's dragging along a telegraph line. But this really gets me. A woman used as propaganda, almost naked, right? With pure white, ethereal, blonde female, bringing light from the heavens, from the east, and pushing forward those out of their lands and out of their places, the buffalo, the indigenous, etc. So the doctrine of manifest destiny facilitated the geographic extension and economic development of the US while confirming racist policies and practices. So it institutionalized white supremacy more firmly than ever as central to the US definition of itself. The arrogance of asserting that God gave white people, primarily men, the right to dominate everything around them still haunts our society, whoa, and sustains its racist oppression. So we have a better sense of where this has come from in our contemporary society. Manifest destiny was used to create a circle of power around the US and influence other countries. Some current effects today can be seen in the desperate migrant caravans trying to escape their dangerous home countries like Honduras and Guatemala. Colonialism and its narratives were morally wrong. This is what I say. And there is no erasure of this immorality, excusing the behavior in terms of cultural or historical context. And a lot of conversations about that. So I said our colonizing forefathers were guilty of terrible acts, but I am complicit because I am embedded in the ongoing system that's based on othering, social caste, militarism, destruction of Mother Earth, racism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. Whoa, wow. And all of this is in my story, my own personal story. So this has been a lot to integrate and process, particularly because it affects my self-identity, as you had asked about. So that's me on the right, little girl standing up. I had a much stronger realization of my family's perpetration of destruction violence, poison, war, and genocide. We flourished materially based on our ancestors' horrific actions. But I could outline the soul wounding that our family has experienced, invoking addictions, mental illness, bad health, and certainly our own bad acts, which leaves us generally feeling empty and yearning for something right and some connection with meaning and love. Yes, we must fight white supremacy and racism. It is a distortion of humanness, a dark shadow embedded in our ancestral memories. We can find it subtly in ourselves and blatantly in the public square now. I have realized the depth which my ancestors were influenced by their need to join the white narrative, a system that is based on the very long history of Europeans and Christianity. I realize the benefits that I maintain in my life now, very clearly traceable through the last 6 generations and passed on to my children and now my grandchildren as education, money, status, and the lack of oppression as being white in this society and culture. And my education here at Broadway is very much a special privilege that I now realize was enabled by a system that ostracized and excluded the others. That's a heartbreaker. So who am I if I am made of the horrific history of my ancestors and I personally am a perpetrator of harm to my most precious babies? My soul was wounded, my body ached. I could not deny what happened because it was me, it is me. My question: how to be redeemed as a perpetrator? How not do harm again when I am so enmeshed in harmful society, complicit and in collusion? And when and where do I take a stand against today's corruption? I committed to begin with telling the truth about this history to other women, about what is an ongoing denial of our power, to other descendants of European American white history, with an invitation to look at our background, to other Catholics, even nuns, about our corrupted Christian heritage, and to you all, because you are part of my Sacred Heart family and inheritors of this legacy. I look to my own atonement to grasp my obligations from this personal history. Truth-telling, working to never do this kind of harm again, working on restitution, releasing my need for righteousness and meaning, being in the wound of the broken, open heart, the Sacred Heart. I felt just in the last year that I was capable of apologizing for what was done in my name and in my blood. It had a lot to do with me forgiving my ancestors and me understanding that I was worthy myself of being forgiven. Just to say, worthiness has been a very intimate challenge for me. I personally apologize to Indigenous people for the horrors perpetrated by my genetic and spiritual ancestors. I renounce those actions, realize the privileges and benefits I have accrued by them, and resolve to make amends and atonement as a woman of faith. I promise to stop doing the harms. I felt that I wanted to focus on the descendants of the California Indians that my ancestors so badly treated. I went to local indigenous-led demonstrations, and I just kept showing up for the last 6 years or so. And I've studied indigenous history to give me some context and to better understand how my ancestors fit in. Grief and the sadness I feel are a part of who I am now. My efforts to deal with this inheritance have included pilgrimages to my ancestors' homes and burial places, to the Mexican land grant in Monterey, stolen by the Vallejos, to the massacre site that Connor created, to the Redwoods for solace, to the Amamutsan sacred place where they allow all to do ceremonial devotions and prayers, their Mount Umanum in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and to the many places where Our Lady of Guadalupe is. She comforts and shelters me. My archetype is Mother Baby, Mother Earth. And it feels immutable to me. So I do not consent to the harm being done. I do not consent to the harm being done, particularly to life givers in our world. I renounce the lineage of horrific perpetration that I come from. I look to manifest the restitution that my ancestors are calling for me to do now. Yes, my ancestors are involved in this. They've become more real and more manifest to me over these years. What is restitution, reparation, and regeneration for the harms and horrors done in my family and by my beloved spiritual guides from Sacred Heart? How can I redeem myself and my legacy? Where is redemption, actually, for all of us? I met the Amamutsan tribal band chairman, Val Lopez, 3 years ago at the Pioneers Conference here in Marin County. When I introduced myself and I said that I was working on truth-telling to other European American Catholics about their own suppressed history, specifically about the doctrine of discovery, he immediately invited me to come to their own personal tribal wellness meeting. He said, because the tribal band was committed to mutual healing with descendants of perpetrators of harm to the indigenous. Yes, I fit that description. And I wanted to heal. This is the actual design of the Mexican land grant. You can look them up on the internet, they're all there. This is the one that Ignacio Vallejo received in 1824. And it is within the Amamutsan Ohlone territory near Watsonville. I didn't know this until I met Val Lopez. But the chairman of that band, Val, said we must heal together, that it is reciprocal. I had been working on my own redemption personally, confessing, doing penance, wondering about my worthiness. What is it that I should be doing? But this was literally within the last month. Val made me finally realize, after 3 years of relationship, that my healing was not individual, but it was collective. It was a mutual healing with those who had been wronged. Wow. It took me 3 years to actually grasp his words, his offering, and his invitation. That this is not just my solitary act of penance, confession, and atonement. He has invited me into a relationship together to heal. He has received me, and I am with him and the Amamutsan tribe in this endeavor for a right relationship. It seems to me one portion of right relationship is also with our future generations and our Mother Earth. currently the land of the Amamutsun that was stolen by my ancestor and used for profit by cattle grazing for almost 200 years, which was destroyed by the cattle grazing, is being regenerated by the Elkhorn Slough Foundation. They own the land now. And my granddaughters have oak trees planted in their names there. So the full aspect of what that might be, of the regeneration of the land and the connection to the harms done and the people and the living human relationship. I really hope there'll be more openings in our work together for restitution and reparation. And I have a few initiatives that I'm working on right now directly related to that. So a healthy earth community with our children, mothers and grandmothers, and all our kin cherished, all life from the rocks to the sky to the water, being in right relationship, I feel will heal and transform us and our world. And discovering our responsibilities and obligations, what happens when you get to some realization about the truth is what is the responsibility, and therefore what is the obligation as women, life givers, and descendants of Europeans in our world today, knowing that we have benefited from our family's history of persecution, violence, and its participation in a white supremacist society. So we're standing to repair, restore, and heal, and pass it on. In my wounded bones, I find redemption and sacredness. With my Mother Earth, I find nurturance and forgiveness with my fellow kin creatures. So I find oneness, interdependent relationship with laughter and love. I really had a hard time with our stay-at-home order in March. And I went into a grief and mourning about this isolation. I cut my hair off. This is 9 months worth of growth. I put away all my family photos and my altars and my symbols. I asked my granddaughters, 10-year-old twin granddaughters, to Zoom with me every night. So that lasted 2 weeks until I turned off the chat and they couldn't do chat with each other. But this time and this moment and this action and world in which we are at this very moment has intensified my commitments to a better world. So I resolved to stand up as a faith leader for the values that are life-giving, mutually enhancing for the well-being of all creation. And I can look to Mater Admirabilis as a model of fierce compassion and radical love in our culture now. I used to see her as submissive. Never really kind of liked her all those years at Broadway because I thought she was just way too, her eyes were down. But I've come to realize that she is present. She's very there and contained and confident in her authentic identity, as I attain to be. And she has watched over so many generations and still is across the globe in our Sacred Heart family schools. And I've learned that she evolves as our own needs and insights change about her. This is a deeply heartbreaking and opening version of Mater. What does she mean to you, the Sacred Heart student of today? I'm interested. And I wish my generation had been more like her for your generation. I feel a responsibility to you, the future generation. So much of these harms have actually happened within my lifetime that we're living with. The acceleration of it is very real. and I feel a deep responsibility for it. And I want to apologize with heartfelt sorrow to you, the students and the future generations, for the harms and destruction my generation has allowed over the last 50 years of my adulthood. So I do not have the answers for the problems that you will be dealing with, that you are dealing with, right? But I can say to you that you are capable and you are loved and you will figure this out. I know. I have the faith in you. As long as we're defending the sacred, our bodies, our lives, our children, our land, the Sacred Heart, with devotion and love. I commit to our wholeness and healing and redemption and mutual connection within the invitation from the Amamutsin. I have faith in the goodness of creation. So our healing is together. Our redemption is in relationship. Our love for the future generations, your grandchildren and mine and all life. May we become beloved ancestors and bless us all. And may we do the actions in the streets. We need to do this to stand up and work for a better world. And 1,000 grandmothers get out in the streets and we say, grandmothers in the street. And people recognize it. So Guadalupe is a very special symbol for me of protection and love. I'd love to hear your reactions and insights. Perhaps, some of the questions are, what is your gift for the world from your unique environment and lineage and privilege? And I'll end with this. Hopefully I won't